Hey gamers, Maniac here with GameAccess.net doing my next site podcast. This is it. This is the big one. This is the most highly requested podcast topic that I've gotten. A lot of people have been giving me requests to do this topic, and I am nothing if not, I will listen to to people that comment. I am nothing if not generous, and therefore here it is. We're going to be talking about Doom and the Doom franchise. Doom was a precursor to the Quake franchise. It was a series developed by id Software. It has been published by multiple different publishers. There have been 3 major game releases, several re-releases, ports across multiple different platforms, but the origin platform of it is, of course, the PC. Now, I'm going to do this podcast a little bit differently than I've done some of my earlier podcasts, and the reason why is because I didn't really get into Doom when Doom was in its heyday. I know I'm probably going to say, well, I'm ashamed of that to say, and I have rectified that. I have played Doom since then, of course. But or when Doom originally came out on the PC, I didn't have a PC. I had no gaming platforms at all. I didn't get my first gaming PC until the end of 1996, and by that point, everybody was talking about Quake, which is why I did the Quake podcast. Of course, I am, familiar with the Quake franchise. But that having been said, I know a ton of Doom's history, and I want to kind of start this off with a bit of a history lesson. The Doom franchise was started by the pioneers of gaming at id Software. It was a game series that they were working on mostly after the conclusion of Wolfenstein 3D. id Software had come into formation by a bunch of guys who used to work for a company at SoftDisk in Shreveport, Louisiana. I believe I pronounced that correctly. If I didn't, just leave a comment. And they, all of a sudden, one of the people that worked for them, named John Carmack, had developed the technology basically on his own to have a side-scrolling engine on a PC. Now, I know what you're saying, but isn't side-scrolling been around? Wasn't it on, games like, isn't the NES capable of doing that back in the day? The original Mario was a side-scroller. Surely this can't be difficult to do, to have a side-scroller. Actually, it was. The NES was specifically designed with that type of hardware functionality in mind. The PC was not. PC didn't have the power to do a full side-scrolling engine. Even the most powerful computers at the time, which were 386s, were not that powerful. But by goodness, John Carmack made it work. And with that technology in mind, he decided, we need to break off. This, no one is going to tell us what to do with this. We are going to be the masters of our own destiny with this technology. And they developed their first major game, which was Commander Keen. There was a second Commander Keen series, and then after that, there were some smaller spin-off games and things like that. And then everybody switched to Wolfenstein. Now, Wolfenstein was probably the game that really put id Software on the map. This was a game that was so interesting in so many respects because it was really violent. Not only was it really violent, but it pretty much set the tone for first-person shooters up to this point. There really weren't first-person shooters before Wolfenstein. I mean, there were 3D action games and stuff like that, flight simulators and things like that, but nothing really with the realism that what could be offered by a game like Wolfenstein 3D. So immediately after the conclusion of Wolfenstein, the ideas came. Okay, we have to kick it up. We've done our game about killing Nazis and castles and mazes and everything else. We have we've invented practically a whole new genre, which is a first-person shooter game, which had not really been seen by that up to that point. They practically invented the genre overnight. We have to basically up the ante. We need more. We need something bigger. John Carmack, went away for a period of time to do his own research on his own computers and development kits and stuff like that. And when he came back, he had Doom with him. And that was where his terms, those were his words. And work pretty much began on Doom. Now, the cool thing about Doom was it really was an expansion in every respect in Wolfenstein. There were still limitations of the game, but it brought a lot of new technology to the table. a lot of new technology to the table. It had graphical fidelity beyond what Wolfenstein could have. It had colored lighting. It had elevation. You could texture the walls. You could have open arenas. You know, you could you could texture the floors and the ceilings. You could model those. You couldn't do that before in Wolfenstein. And you could have open areas. You could have outdoors. You could have bigger, enemies. It was fascinating. But I think what really made this beyond and made this like a next level game that was so defining was probably the strength of its gameplay, but also its multiplayer. When they first designed Doom, they intended to have a multiplayer component with it. Then there were really only two ways to do multiplayer at the time. There was no ISPs really back. There were no ISPs right back then, and even if there were, they were their own dedicated systems, not connected amongst each other. The ones that were very rarely used. So what happened instead was that there would be two options. One, you could have computers networked together locally, whether that be in like an office building or whether that be among in like a university setting or something along those lines. Otherwise, networked computers were not fairly common, at least not for home use. Or you could have modems, which were literally what you think they are. You know, you could dial up your friend's house, and dial into his computer and play that way. That was it. That was the only way. There was really no access to the internet, and the game could not support that. But when they first saw the technology, when John Romero and John Carmack saw the technology for the first time that Carmack had developed, when for the first time ever, you could have one player and another player, both on two separate computers, connecting to each other and shooting and firing at each other. It was basically this birth of deathmatch. The game probably is responsible for birthing the term deathmatch. Yeah, John Romero is the person who takes credit for coining that term. Now, I don't want to do too much of a history lesson here or a very detailed history lesson in here because otherwise, if that's true, this is going to be several hours long. I do recommend some first expanded reading if you're very interested in learning more about the making of Doom or the id Software in general. I recommend seeking out the book Masters of Doom by David Kushner, which is a fantastic book. It's in paperback. I think it's out of print right now. It was first printed in 2003. The paperback came out in 2004. I don't think it's in print anymore, but you might be able to find it. That book actually is probably one of my favorite books of all time, if not my favorite book of all time. And I wish someday maybe to get to meet Kushner and have him sign one of my copies or something like that because I love those books and I thought it was really well written. And I recommend seeking it out if you want to learn more about it. The book pretty much ends during the development of Doom 3, or at the start pretty much of the development of Doom 3, in case you're curious what's the timeline. The timeline is just before the creation. Well, basically it's mostly about Romero and Carmack, although a lot of other characters show up in it, of course. And it does a chapter about each of their lives, growing up, and then it kind of starts to when they start working at Soft Disk. And then it leads up to when the book was published, which was just when Doom 3 was announced. So again, I'm getting a bit ahead of myself, but if you want a really good history lesson, I recommend looking up that book. So the thing that id Software decided to do with this game was that they were no longer publishing it through a third party group. They published the game themselves, which made a lot of money for them. Previously, in their previous games like Wolfenstein or Commander Keen, they had a company called Apogee, who would later be called 3D Realms, handled the shareware development for them. This was done by a guy named Scott Miller, who ran the company. Yes, I know you're saying, I know these guys, I've heard of these names before. Yes, you have. And they published id Software's games. So what they would do is they'd have id Software make games in like 3 or 4 acts or episodes, if you will. They released the first episode free, and if you wanted more, you'd basically pay for the episodes afterwards, which could be anywhere from about $50, $60 for both of them together. And it made it and it made Apogee a lot of money. Granted, Apogee was also releasing games that they were developing themselves, like Duke Nukem, but they were also publishing other titles. And id Software's was one of them. Well, after Wolfenstein, they kind of had a falling out because they felt that Apogee wasn't filling the order amounts for Wolfenstein that they needed to. And so they decided that they would publish Doom themselves. They also determined that they were going to release the game in the same business model, but that they were going to handle it themselves. So they put their own money into it, which was money that was earned from the royalties from like Commander Keen and Wolfenstein and everything else, and set up their own distribution network while they were working on the game. Now, here was the kicker. They were also giving out a lot of promotional material and things like this as well to all the studios. I'm not the studios, the retailers, so that they could sell the game at retail if they needed to. They were fairly certain that the positive press was going very, very high. As, these were, of course, the Castle Wolfenstein guys. So everyone was really looking forward to Doom because that was going to be their, the Wolfenstein guys' next game. And so they were courting retailers and giving them press material and everything else, saying, promote this game because it's going to make you a lot of money. It's going to make a lot of money. Basically both of us will work together and do well for each other, basically. And they did. And you couldn't have had better terms for everybody involved because everyone kind of knew that this game was going to be a huge success because of how good it was. And then the game came out. When they released the first episode for shareware, they had somebody hosting it when they uploaded it online. And as soon as it got uploaded, pretty much level of people swamped the site, which they were not expecting. They couldn't believe it. And it crashed the computer that was hosting it. And nobody had ever seen something like that before. The demand for the Doom shareware was so high that nobody had ever seen anything like that before. Nobody. This was something special. The world hadn't seen anything like this before. So, fast forward, and the game comes out, and it's a huge hit. In fact, actually, a lot of people would say that there was probably more copies of Doom shareware on computers than there were copies of Windows 95. That was just something that I think Microsoft figured out at some point. And Doom was a game that pretty much had next to no, monetary advertising or anything like that when they released it. It was all basic underground, word of mouth kind of thing. It wasn't, and yet it did so much more successfully. When Microsoft had developed all these millions of dollars advertising campaign blitzes, and yet more people had copies of Doom. Very surprising when you think about it. There was also a time when basically Windows was coming out. Of course, Microsoft knew that there was probably going to need to be a Windows version of Doom in order for for Windows to really get its own ground on the PC market. Everyone was still using DOS for the most part because DOS was what was being used by most of these games. So, I can't remember. Alex St. John, I believe his name is, who now is the guy at Wild Tangent, was tasked by Bill Gates to develop a way for Windows to be able to understand all of these computer systems, all of your computer hardware, regardless of who manufactured it. They basically needed something inside Windows so that you didn't need to be hardware specific in order for your software to work on hardware. And they developed DirectX. DirectX was basically developed as a response because at that point, when software was originally developed, it had to be developed specifically for whatever hardware that the computer was going to be on. If there was a change in the hardware, there would be a problem and the program would crash. There was no universal system back then or any type of layer that could be in place so that a game could run just based upon what the hardware of the system was, regardless of who made it. It just wasn't in place. And everyone basically cites back to the Microsoft Compact debacle with The Lion King. When they had developed a game called The Lion King, Compact changed the hardware after the game had already been finished at the last minute. And when everybody booted up the Lion King for Christmas that year, the game didn't work. The game crashed. So there was that. DirectX took care of that problem. And there's a video that probably is floating around online of the day where they were finally promoting, the gaming capabilities of Windows, where Bill Gates is holding a trench coat in Doom, like literally he's superimposed in Doom, and he fires a shotgun at a imp monster, saying these games are getting really realistic. It was hilarious. So yeah, I think Alex St. John kept, somebody kept the tape. But that, in case you find a video like that somewhere online, that was its source. I forget what the event was called, but it is authentic. And it was, I believe, Alex St. John's idea to do the video like that, because he couldn't get Bill Gates to appear in person at the event, so they decided instead to get like a video recorded. And he figured, well, if we're going to do a video recorded, let's make it cool. And handed Bill Gates a shotgun. At least that's how they said it. So, of course, everyone's looking at Doom 2 right now. Doom 2 is pretty much the project that followed the original Doom. The precursor of it was basically Doom 2 Hell on Earth. It continued the story of the original Doom, where where they had spread from Mars to from Mars to Earth. For the most part, how do I put this? I didn't really play Doom 2. I obviously that it's basically is like expanded more levels of Doom 1, some new weapons, new enemies. There was a Commander Keen reference. There was like an episode where you had to kill Commander Keen or something along those lines. I thought that was kind of cool. It was a nice little nod to some of their earlier games. Yeah, I thought that was kind of cool. So Doom 2 comes out, and that was, I believe, the first game ever rated by the ESRB. So just to show you, and the reason why I think the ESRB had to be put in place was because you had games coming out at the time. Now, everyone likes to basically say it was Mortal Kombat and Night Trap. Doom was also on that list. They probably just didn't know about it until, for most part, people weren't complaining about Doom until about 5 or 6 years after it came out. So that just goes to show you how timely most news organizations are. So that's what happened. They didn't, because the game was so underground, so people weren't complaining. It did, of course, happen. People did start complaining about it, but then again, people complain about everything, so there you have it. I'm sure somebody's going to be complaining about this podcast right now. I don't mean to offend. I'm just saying. And after that, so in response, the ESRB was formed, Entertainment Software Rating Board. I am not going to talk much more about how my feelings about that organization are, except to say that they are pretty much, they are a rating system, and they established themselves in the first game that they are a volunteer rating system, I should say. I left out that word. I meant to say they are the volunteer rating system, and the first game to brand to have one of their ratings was Doom 2. So I thought that was quite interesting. I really did. I guess that was in response to kind of how people felt about some of the games. They kind of figured, well, we'll get the most violent game we can find and we'll rate it first. Worked, whatever their ideas were. I guess that's fine. So the first game to be rated by the SRB was Doom 2. So after Doom 2, John Carmack starts working on new technology and focus shifts to the Quake engine because, to be perfectly honest, with Doom and Doom 2, there were a lot of limitations. The player couldn't jump. You couldn't have one room on top of another. You couldn't have a player looking up and down, so therefore aiming was kind of a problem. Mouse aiming really didn't come around until Duke Nukem 3D came out, and that was in '96. So, with all of the technology that Doom and Doom 2 brought, there were still limitations to it. Obviously, there were mods and stuff like that that were being developed on a major scale with Doom, which was mostly, I think it was, oh God, who's that guy responsible? I'm trying to remember his name. It was the guy who was the divine, I don't know, can't remember. Tom Hall. I believe it was Tom Hall's idea in order to develop a file called a .wad, which was short for Where's All That Data, where basically you can create all of, they'd have their own, WAD files, which would recognize where all the mod files were to load the game. In the case of Doom, A modder could create their own files and create their own WAD extension file and switch to that so that Doom would know what to load and where all the data was from. Previously, modding had happened in games like Wolfenstein 3D, but if a game was modded, it couldn't be easily reverted without removing the game and reinstalling it. Doom took care of that problem. People could create their own mods, people could create their own levels, people could create their own custom weapons with their own weapon abilities. Simply just change where the WAD file was located, and boom, you've basically got, just point the game to a different WAD file, and boom, you've got yourself a modded game, which can be easily reverted back to its original version. And of course, that modding history has continued on again and again and again for, and it pretty much kept the PC on top of the consoles up until around at least 2007 or so. So, after that, focus kind of shifted to Quake, and I'm not going to really talk about Quake that much because if you're interested in hearing about Quake, you can just check out the Quake podcast that I've done previously. My apologies for making this a bit more of a history lesson than I was expecting it to, but I kind of felt like, well, I think that's necessary. Now, I got into gaming around 1996 or so. I mostly was a Quake guy growing up because I really hadn't had the chance to play the Doom games early on. So I was an id Software fan from the beginning when I got a PC. Of course, I have the Unknown Camera person to thank for that. But no, I hadn't really played. I had played Commander Keen because Commander Keen was one of those demo games. But I had played the shareware of Wolfenstein 3D. But Doom wasn't a shareware that was included with the PC that I got, so therefore I hadn't really played it. And when everybody shifted focus to Quake, you couldn't really find Doom on the shelves back then. So time passes, and id starts working on the Quake games and everything else. And sometime around the end of Quake 3 Team Arena, id Software starts talking about Doom again. Doom starts coming back into the forefront. Now, continuing on with that story, I believe everyone kind of knows the story about, John Carmack and Paul Steed. By the way, Paul Steed, rest in peace. Paul Steed is no longer with us. And where John Carmack's idea was that he wanted to make another Doom game. John Carmack was working on his own technology around the time that Quake 3 Team Arena wrapped up, which is what he always does. After every game release, he does start, doing his experimentations and doing his research on what he can develop his next major technological engine on. And really, the game developers at id Software, some of the other owners, and some of the other designers, kind of wanted to do something else. They didn't want to do another first-person shooter. They felt that they'd been pretty much making shooters since the beginning, and they really didn't want to make another one. They kind of wanted to make something new. Quake, for example, was originally supposed to be something new. So what happened was instead, they didn't really know what to do with it. The popular story is, and this is pretty much the story that you'll read in Masters of Doom or anywhere else, is that they were going to work on a game called Quest instead of, and after Team Arena, and it was going to be no more rocket launchers. It was going to be a whole new type of genre for id Software. By the way, if you want a more detailed story about Doom, about the making of Doom 3, I actually have it on my site under one of my tabs. There's a tab called The Making of Doom 3 or Doomsday or something like that. It was like a 35-page paper I wrote on the making of Doom 3, and you're welcome to check out my site, GameAccess.net, and read it if you wish. So, what had happened was, instead they decided to do this, Carmack wanted to make Doom 3. He felt his technology was more versed for a game like Doom than as opposed to another game like Quest. And he asked Paul Steed to be on board with it after already getting the permission of, oh God, what's the guy's name? Trent Reznor, who they had worked with on previous games. He told Trent about it. Trent liked the idea, and then he told Paul, and Paul Paul really liked the idea as well. Paul Steed later got fired, but they decided that Doom 3 was going to be what they were going to work on, and of course Trent Reznor also left the project sometime around 2003 or 2004. So here's what happened. Doom 3, basically, if you've played it, is pretty much a retelling of Doom 1. It was kind of like a reboot of the series. And they really did a great job with the visceral everything going on. They basically they had on their hands the most powerful graphics engine on the planet with the best lighting and shadowing system that they could think of, and it was beautiful. Now, I waited since pretty much day one, the day one announcement, when Carmack, posted his plan file for Doom 3. That was like the biggest game that I was anticipating at that time. And I wanted to play it badly. In 2002, the game was shown for the first time publicly at E3, and it just blew everyone away. It blew everyone away. Everyone was really impressed by it. The graphics, the sound, and sadly enough, that was one. I could not go to that E3 at the time. E3's minimum age rating was 18. Now it's 17. But at the time it was 18, and I was 17 at the time, and I was not going to turn 18 for at least another month before the event. And even though I was invited to that year's E3, I couldn't go because I didn't meet the minimum age requirement. And I really regret that, but there was absolutely nothing I could do about that. I should have been born sooner, I guess. And but I did go to E3 2003, and sadly enough, they didn't really have a very big showing that year. There wasn't really a big Doom 3 showing at that E3. The major showing that year was Half-Life 2. That was like the big showing that of that year's E3. In 2004, however, they were pretty much getting wrapped up with the game, and everybody was talking about what the game would be bringing to the table for single player and for multiplayer. And they were talking about all the new game mechanics, like the interactive surfaces, which really hadn't been seen in games. The new lighting and shadowing system, which nobody had really seen, the visceral tech, and also the multiplayer. Some people kind of thought it was a problem that they were using 4-player multiplayer. They were kind of going for a different type of multiplayer system. I think they wanted everything to be peer-to-peer, which was a whole new type of thing. Peer-to-peer was kind of taking off at that point because of the peer-to-peer file sharing systems and stuff like that, which I won't really go into, but it was looking like peer-to-peer was going to be replacing client-server. I honestly don't think that was going to happen. And they changed it. It was not, when Doom 3 released, it was not peer-to-peer. It was client-server. But the game design was still built around those ideologies. So it basically had limitations of like 4-player multiplayer deathmatch and stuff like that. Not really a lot of multiplayer capabilities. It was later, they later added multiplayer when they did the expansion packs, but I'll get into all that later. I was one of the first people to actually play Doom 3 because probably by 2004 E3s, they had announced that there was going to be an Xbox One version of Doom 3 released. It wasn't going to be at launch, but it was going to be a couple months after the release of the game, probably before the holidays. Doom 3 was expected to come out that summer. And I remember at E3 2004 playing what I think was the first level of Alpha Labs on Xbox dev kits in the Xbox section of E3. And just thinking to myself, oh my God, this is something really special. I was just blown away finally getting to play the game for the first time. I was so terrified while I was playing it because it's just so scary. Yeah, I just remember this. And later on, I started, when the summer started, I started working I was working that summer. And they really hadn't had a solid release date at all till just before the game came out. So we knew that by that point, that id was just in the process of polishing up Doom 3. But we had no solid release date, so nobody really knew when it was coming out. EB Games, which was the former GameStop, it was now GameStop, but Electronics Boutique, EB Games, whatever you want to call them, made the announcement of the release date, which was going to be, I think, at the beginning of the beginning of August, early August. And nobody really believed them because they were not very trustworthy with release dates at the time. They're now kind of better. But, so nobody really believed them. But they were saying, no, it told us this is it. And then the QuakeCon happened. And they announced that they're going to have the final version of Doom at the QuakeCon. And everybody was going to be really impressed by that. that was only like a couple days after what the announcement for the release date was going to be. So if the game's release date was accurate, at least according to EB Games, then sure enough, then it would make sense that QuakeCon would have final versions of Doom 3 available. It was accurate, and the game went gold. They announced, id Software finally announced, yes, that release date was accurate. Everyone was going crazy happy. And I was just thinking to myself, I have to work that day. I have to work on that release date. I don't know if I'll be able to pick it up. Now, when Doom 3 was on its way of getting released, they were doing what do you call it, like this pre-order little incentive thing, where they had 3 different major retailers that were taking orders. GameStop, Electronics Boutique, which were separate companies at the time, and Best Buy. And if you pre-ordered each of those individual spots, I think you paid I think it was like $5 a piece at GameStop and $5 a piece at GameStop and EB, and it was $10 for Best Buy. You would get a little pewter figurine in a box, and then you could just give them your receipt or your coupon or whatever and pick it up. I pre-ordered just on a fluke at this mall that wasn't too far away from where this work was, not thinking I was actually going to be picking up the order there. Just thinking that I wanted those, I was willing to pay $5 for those pewter figurines. It turned out, because I was working there that summer, it actually helped me because it actually did help. I got the phone call saying, oh, by the way, come and pick up this morning or whatever. And I remember knowing that I was going to get a break that morning because testing was happening. And by that I mean standardized testing. So there's going to be some standardized testing going on that morning. And I intentionally took the early shift. I took the really early shift at 8 o'clock because I knew I would be done at 9:30, 10 o'clock or so. And I figured the standardized testing was going to continue, but a separate team was going to do it. GameStop opened at 10? 10 in the morning. I could, in my break time, the hour I had or something like that before testing fully ended, I could get in my car, go pick up the game, and bring it back. And I did. And I remember telling my boss, who I had known for since 1999 or 2000 or something like that. I told my boss what I was doing, and she loved me. She was, she was great. And I said to her, I know that I've been working here for a lot of years, but I've been waiting for Doom 3 longer. And she just laughed and chuckled. I mean, I didn't play it. I just had to go pick it up. I didn't play it until later on. But I figured that was going to be my one opportunity to go pick it up, so I intentionally scheduled and I picked it up early that morning when I scheduled myself a break. It just happened that the fates aligned and my schedule could align that I could just go and have the time to pick that up, so I thought that was great, and that worked out fantastically. And so I picked it up, I had a copy, and I pretty much spent that summer in my basement playing games, because in my house, for the most part, we have central air in this house, but for the most part, a lot of years it just never worked properly. It just wasn't strong enough, or it wasn't designed well enough, or it was just, functional problems or something like that, where the air conditioning in the upstairs never worked properly. We'd have central air, but we might as well not have had central air, because the upstairs would still be hot. So my computer would be basically in a hot room playing Doom 3. Of course, it would be crashing and overheating from heat exhaustion. And yes, it did cause damage, and I won't go into that. Yes, of course, you're going to say, well, wouldn't that permanently damage the system? Yes, absolutely, and I've had to replace those components for several times. So what happened was that I basically took apart my computer and moved it into my basement, which was the only cool area of the house. And I plugged directly into the main lines down there. And I played Doom 3 in my basement that summer. And occasionally I'd invite the unknown camera person. I'd tell the unknown camera person, come over, bring your computer, we'll play Doom in the basement. And we did. That's what we did. And, oh my God, those were just some fun memories. Those were some really fun memories. That was stuff we used to do. So, those are some of my favorite Doom memories, actually. It's like that and, at E3 and everything else. Those were just some of my favorite Doom memories. Obviously, by that point, Doom 3 kind of became a LAN party staple. And I remember it specifically whenever we'd do LAN parties and stuff like that, we'd play it. In fact, I remember that there was a LAN center that was open in my house, and I kind of talked about this in my short film, Small Town Geek Bar, where there was this place that was called the Combat Zone, and they did have copies of Doom 3. In fact, I think they got it when the game came out because they were open just around the time the game came out. So I'd swing on by there at least every weekend and deathmatch against people, including the unknown camera person who I did beat at least once. I remembered beating them at least once, and I missed the Combat Zone. I really did. The Combat Zone was a great place. It's really sad that place pretty much didn't last until New Year's. I mean, when New Year's came, the place pretty much shut down, which was sad as heck. It just abruptly just shut down at New Year's. I don't know why. I still don't have an explanation to that. I think I caught one of the owners, but he was just so when I asked him about it, and he was so mad. I don't know what he wouldn't talk about it because apparently it was still rubbing him the wrong way. He couldn't give me an answer. But that was a great place where there weren't too many people there and everything else. But for the most part, the people that were there were really nice people, and we could have fun and drink some balls and play Doom and run a real tournament and everything. And if I ever get the opportunity, I might just reshoot Small Town Geek Bar. But I can't get. The problem was the Combat Zone was a great place, but yet I'm the only person I know that's able to talk about it. I don't know where any of the other people that used to frequent the place are. And the unknown camera person outright refuses to show up in front of a camera in any circumstances. So I couldn't get them to do it. So, to interview. I wouldn't be able to get them to be able to interview. So if I did another sequel to Small Town Geek Bar, it would just be me on the camera alone. But I'd be in widescreen. Really sad about that. I thought the place kind of deserved some positive memories. So I liked it. So Doom 3 comes out, and then shortly afterwards they make the announcement that there's going to be a Doom 3 expansion, which is going to kind of continue the story. There's a lot of cool backstory about Doom 3, which I don't really want to get into. If you guys are interested in some tidbits about stuff in Doom 3, there is another book called The Making of Doom 3. It's kind of like a coffee table book. It was made by Stephen Kent, who writes a lot of video game history books and stuff like that. He's and usually he also does appear in a lot of interviews, because apparently he's one of those guys that is one of those not archivists, but he's a historian about video games, all different kinds of video games, and most of the time when they used to make really good documentaries about making of video games and stuff like that, he used to appear in them and be interviewed. So he wrote The Making of Doom 3, and he told things originally the Soul Cube was supposed to be it would require 10 enemy kills as opposed to 5. They decided to change that in playtesting, and Betruger wasn't supposed to be the bad guy. He was always supposed to be the bad guy, but it wasn't clear that he was the bad guy. Swan was supposed to, you were supposed to think that Swan was the bad guy originally. So just stuff like that. MartianBuddy.com is awesome. I thought that was one of the best jokes that I had seen at that point, where they'd have these lockers, and you'd say you have to go to MartianBuddy.com in order to get the key for the locker. You literally have to shut off the game, load up a web browser, and go to MartianBuddy.com for the code. I thought that was great. Nowadays, you could probably just do it on your smartphone, but I thought that was great. So, what is the future for Doom? What is the future for Doom? Well, obviously, everyone's talking about Doom 4, which is just going to be called simply Doom. It's been in development for a very long time. It's going to be using the Rage engine, which is kind of called the Tech 5 engine right now. Or the Tech 5 engine, whatever you want to call it. There hasn't really been anything seen of it since its original announcement. So the game is kind of having some probably development problems. I don't know. Every year they say, it'll be shown next year's QuakeCon. And every year, no, we don't see it. So it's just we just don't know what's going on with that. But we do know that it's going to be using the Tech 5 engine. There's also another, they are re-releasing Doom 3. Doom 3 is going to be re-released to Xbox, PC, Xbox 360, PS3, and PC. And it's going to include all the versions of Doom, Doom 2, Doom 3, Doom 3's expansion, and some new levels that we haven't seen yet. Um, Actually, Doom 3 had a collector's edition on the Xbox. I thought that was kind of cool. They ported Doom and Doom 2 over, and actually I think it also had split screen co-op on it because it couldn't support multiplayer. Of course, also, if you're interested in playing Doom or Doom 2 right now, you probably can. Doom and Doom 2 have been ported to the Xbox 360 and are available for download at the Xbox 360 Marketplace, or you can just wait for the disc to come out. That's how I admit that I did, before, while Doom 3 was in development, I did play through the Doom shareware. And I remember later on, after I came back from California, Doom did get re-released in this box called, I think it was like the Doom Trilogy, where they took like Doom, Doom 2, and Final Doom and added in and put them all on one disc. And I remember playing through the original Doom entirely, just playing that. They had ported so it would work on Windows. But nowadays you could probably play Doom on like your cell phone nowadays, which is pretty cool. So this is without a doubt probably one of the biggest franchises in gaming history. I mean, probably one of the most enduring ones, because this was like one of the first. I mean, what did you have back then? You know, you had Mario, you had Sonic, you had Doom. Everyone knows what that franchise is. It's just so ubiquitous, and it's so simple when you think about it as well. You know, armies from hell are invading the planet. Here, you know, save the planet with hope and plenty of ammunition. You know, it's just so simple. I mean, I remember having I was talking to one of my ex-girlfriend's mothers back when I was dating this girl, and she brought it up. You know, these games. And I said, the army of hell is not coming with flowers, and I can tell you that right now. They don't come in peace. This is the army of hell. They don't come in peace. What would you do under these circumstances? You know. And they understood that. I thought when I made it that clear that they did I thought they understood that. So, here's to the future of Doom. I'm seriously hoping that Doom 4 does get finally seen at some point, because I've been looking forward to that for many years. I don't know really anything more about that project than probably you do, which is nothing. They had a teaser trailer. They announced it at QuakeCon a few years ago, and there really hasn't been anything seen since. They keep claiming people are working on it, but I think it's being done by a third party studio or something like that. And we knew that it was going to be out after Rage. I think everybody knew that we were going to have to wait until after Rage came out before it came out. But, yeah. I think they also said that there's going to be a hardware limitation with that, when that was that intentionally they designed Rage around 60 frames a second, because they were going to be upping the graphical threshold and the effects in Doom 4, that they probably were going to lock that at 30 frames per second as opposed to 60 frames, which I thought was alright. You know, they're just going to have more crazy stuff on the screen and everything. So, I can't wait to see anything further. If you're interested in playing these games for the first time, I definitely recommend holding out for the disc release for the Doom Collection, because that looks to be a fantastic deal. And I want to hear your comments on this. What are your first memories? Just think about it. There's also, by the way, one other thing I wanted to mention was, as of recently, I remember after I did the Quake podcast, I was talking a lot about the directors of the guy who made Quake the movie, Escape from the Bastille, and what he was doing since. And he actually made a Doom basic machinima, like a machinima using the Doom engine. He also used the Quake 3 engine. And he made like a little machinima which kind of basically combined the Doom series and the Quake series and everything else. And I thought it was really well made. It was called Arenas. And he cut it together into one, practically a feature-length movie. And he put it on YouTube. And I definitely recommend checking it out if you haven't yet, because it's awesome. Some of it does use the Quake 3 engine. A lot of it uses the Doom 3 engine. But it's a lot of fun to watch. They replicated the Quake characters, the Quake multiplayer characters, and everything else. So I thought that was really cool, and I definitely recommend checking it out. Obviously, I just want to say at the very end, thank you, John Carmack. Thanks for doing such a great job, and all the other guys who worked at id Software when Doom was coming out. Heck, even John Romero, Adrian Carmack, Kevin Cloud, for coming around when Doom 3 came out. Just some great stuff, and I can't wait to see what you guys do next. I really can't. So this was the Doom story. Until I don't really have another podcast scheduled for right now, but I want to hear your comments. Obviously, if you want me to hear, if you want to post a comment on what you think podcast series I should do next, by all means do that. And I'll talk to you guys later. This is Maniac, over and out.